What's good, YouTube? Steel here, and in today's video we'll be once again looking at the biggest tournament of this past weekend. But instead of looking at the most played or the most successful deck list, I want to highlight the off-meta decks, the decks that performed well but maybe didn't see the representation to really stand out. However, that's what makes it stand out to me. For the sake of consistency, the decks I'm considering for this video have to have less than a 3% play rate in the tournament, as well as manage to have at least one player highlight the deck to a 70% win rate or better. And this past weekend had 5 decks that met these requirements that I really want to talk about. But before we begin, I'd like to ask y'all to please consider subscribing, as we're getting closer to 700 and my first big goal of 1000 is starting to look far more realistic, and I couldn't do it without every single one of y'all. Also, I'd like to mention that I do stream Monday through Fridays on Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok, so feel free to tune in, and maybe we'll be trying out some of these decks we see in this video in the ranked ladder. Hope to see y'all there. Thanks for watching, and let's get right into the video. For starters, I want to start off with Tapoko Archus deck. Full transparency, this is a deck that I was already aware of before the Earthsea Day this weekend, because this deck was having decent to somewhat like respectable results in smaller tournaments in the form of like the Magmas or the Froggy X's. However, when it came to like me personally, I tried this out already on stream, and my issue was that in the 5 or 6 games that I tried it, I went against 4 to 5 fighting decks, and it's obviously like the hard counter. So I personally didn't have the best experience with this deck. However, a lot of people in my chat were saying how good this deck is, as well as if you just check the tournament results, it did very well. The only issue that it had is like, again, low representation, so it's hard to like really say how good this deck is. Personally, I can't tell you full force like, oh, this is gonna take you all the way to Master Ball, but it has very strong. It's a very strong deck. It has Lucario to stop the EXs. It has Tapoko, which is one of like the best like starters. Basically, if you're going second and you have Tapoko in the lead, you're probably going to outpace a lot of the decks in the format, if not all of the decks in the format. And then you have Arceus as just a finisher. The main like way you use Arceus in this deck is with the electrical cord being given to any of your electric Pokemon. And once they fall, they give it at least 1 energy to Arceus. And then with Dawn, or with just playing the game as it is, you have Arceus to just basically be the finisher towards the end of the game. As to how well the deck performed, it actually did very well, obviously beating every Charizard that this player went against. Clearly, as Lucario is like one of the biggest counters. It also did well in beating the Sylveon Greninja that they played against. Granted, they seem to have dodged the most popular deck, so I can't really say how consistently it could beat Sylveon Greninja. But then, yeah, ultimately this deck finished X1-1 in Swiss and ended up losing to a Buzzwole. So again, high potential. Not sure how much play you'll see past this, but I couldn't make this video without bringing up Tapoko Arceus. Bouncing off the lightning theme and having Lucario to beat Charizards, as well as Zeraora for charging energy, I wanted to bring attention to this Luxur deck that, although in this tournament it did not top 64, it did have a 6-2 finish. Basically, what kept it out of top cut was just the tiebreakers, but the deck itself has like high potential. Again, it beats Charizard decks. The fact that Luxur could hit anywhere on the field, whether it's the bench or whether it's the active, has a high potential in this format. Where it gets limited is the fact that the most damage you could deal is 120, especially since you don't always hit the active. You can't really depend on cards like Geo or Red to do that extra 20 or extra 10 damage. However, the deck is really good at what it does, and honestly, on paper, seems like one of the funner decks that I've looked at all season. This one's pretty clear what you're trying to do. You're replacing Silvally from the Zeraora or Lucario list for Luxray to have the ability to hit the bench or threaten a victory at any point in the game. The fact that you have Volkners basically means that once you are able to set up Luxray, your ceiling is actually a little higher than Silvally itself. You already have 130 HP. So with Cape, you're actually dodging a lot of ranges with the Luxray, and always Lucario will win you some EX matchups just like Charizard or the occasional Solgaleo. The following deck is one that I did not expect to see at all this season, and that's Archus Crobat. It was one of my favorite decks to use, not last season, but the season before that. Although I would use the Carnivine version. Here they dropped any form of like additional things, whether it's like the list that we're using called Thanos or whatever, that we're using Darkrai and Giratina. They dropped any form of like Carnivine. They dropped anything that was like aggressive to just focus on Arceus and the Crobat. So they added Sylveon just as draw power. Interesting that they went with the Eevee EX. I can't really vouch or explain why they were doing that. What I could say is that when it comes to their matchup, what knocked them out of the tournament, because once again, this is one of those lists that did very well. It finished X2. It was actually like the off-meta decks that knocked it out. The Tapoko list that we saw earlier in this video, as well as a list that we'll be looking in later, was the only 2 losses it had. And when it came to like the meta, it beat Silvally or Lucario. It beat Leafeon, the Evolution deck. It beat the one Sylveon Greninja they went against. Although this is a small sample size, it's just one player and 8 rounds that they played. when it came to like the meta decks, obviously, and actually they even beat a Charizard here that I'm looking right now. But yeah, basically when it came to like the meta decks, they were having a good time. When it came to the off meta, they were struggling. So this could be a deck that could thrive in ranked. Although, once again, take all of this with a grain of salt. This is more of a video to teach you or show you decks that you could try to have fun. I don't want to recommend any of these lists and then you go to ranked, lose a bunch of points, and then come at me. This is literally a video to show you off-meta options that could get you there, as there's proof that there's people that could have success with it. There's just not enough proof to say that it's consistent success. And looking at the list, it's pretty straightforward. Besides the Eevee EX that I can't really explain, it's just the Archus Crobat that we all know and love, or know and hate, I guess, but with the consistency of Sylveon to just try to get Crobat there. Crobat itself gets rid of any of Oricorios. Arceus, once built up, basically gets rid of like everything else. And although I don't have proof of what energy they used here, you have to assume they're either playing all dark or dark psychic so that they could attack with both Pokemon. However, this is one of those decks that in a tournament setting has a little more versatility. Like maybe if you're going against Oricorio, you just play dark energy, knowing that all you need to care for is Crobat knocking out the Oricorio, as well as Arceus then finishing out anything that's not Oricorio, and Sylveon's just on the side, just trying to draw cards if necessary. And then maybe you play dual energy against other matchups so that both your Sylveon and your Crobat can attack. Ultimately, that's stuff that I would need more testing to know myself, and I wish I could contact the player directly and ask them what they decided was the best play. But once again, I was just happy to see this archetype being played and having somewhat success, since it was one of my favorite archetypes, if not my favorite archetype, 2 seasons ago. From today's video, if there's any list that I could wholeheartedly recommend to be played in ranked, or that I believe has high potential in the ranked setting, has to be Bossa Pheromosa. I know visually, maybe you're thinking, how is this an off-meta deck? This was like the best deck a format ago, and now it still sees play. It meets the requirements. In the past Ursi Day, it had less than 3% play rate, and as one of the decks that actually performed very well. It continues to perform very well, and in ranked mode, I'll see it here and there. Also, I do believe this is like the best way to play it, the double Pheromosa version. One thing that I personally would probably try to add is a second Cyrus, but they opted for the Sabrina here. Can't go wrong with that either. It's just a way of manipulating the board. It's something that you don't want to give up. I also like the tool cards being... So basically, this is exactly how I would play it. Give or take a supporter, and it's one of the stronger decks in the format. When looking at their matchups, they actually went against a lot of Oricorio, and this is one of those decks that could deal with the EXs with Buzzwole, whether it's Darkrai, whatever it is, and then Pheromosa with Kartana deals with all the non-EX stuff like Oricorio. At the end of the day, you always have the Celesteela coin flip that can win you the game, which is always like a last-ditch, like a desperate effort, but it works a lot of the time, at least against me. I feel like I lose to the coin flip of Celesteela's coin flip every single time, but the reason it's in this video is because it met the requirements of low playability, high win rate, and it's one of those decks that I could wholeheartedly believe does well in both tournament and ranked settings. Last but not least, the last deck I wanted to point out was a complete throwback in Lucario Rampardos. I know this deck looks exactly like it just came out of like 3 sets ago, but it keeps doing exactly what it has to do. The one questionable card, in my opinion, is the Penny. Not sure what they were cooking with that one, but the deck itself performed very well. This one player went 6-1-1 in tournament going into top cut, ended up losing to Guzzlord, which does seem like a tough matchup. However, they played against 4 Sylveon Greninjas, and they beat 3 of them. The other one they drew into because it was the last round and they didn't have to play. The other decks that it beat in this tournament was a Charizard Sylveon. It beat the Evolution deck. It beat the Arceus deck that we just looked at. So honestly, it's one of those decks that has potential to beat anything that it goes against, because honestly, not only just going second, but in general, it does exactly what it wants to do very consistently, similar to like Savali decks, but you know, just old school. The ceiling is a little lower, but the consistency is kind of there. You know, now with Rare Candy, Rampardos is always an issue that they have to worry about. If you start Hitmonchan, you're swinging for 30. Against Eevees, you're swinging for 50. And if you have the Geo, you also just knock out Eevees turn 1. And Sylveon is played everywhere, so the chances that you see the collect Eevee in front of you is non-zero. Not to mention that once you start setting up Lucario, everything here is hitting for crazy damage. Marshadow can hit for 120. Rampardos is basically knocking out anything that's in front of it. So yeah, outside of the Penny, this deck continues to be exactly the same deck that it was however many sets ago when Spacetime first came out. This has been a deck, and honestly, seeing it have success in this current meta is something that it's almost like bittersweet, mainly because I was never a fan of this deck back in the time. Rampardos has always been one of those cards that never feels like it works for me and works always for the opponent. Like they always have it and I can never find it, similar to Charizard. But let's say you haven't played in forever and you're trying to get back into the game, this is definitely a deck I can recommend because you know exactly what it does. It has not changed its playstyle. It can compete with some, if not all, the top decks in the format. Ultimately, I want to reiterate that the point of this video is to highlight decks that outperform expectations and have potential. However, the lack of play rate makes it where I can't confidently vouch for these lists, as the only thing that could prove if their success is sustainable or consistent would be if they saw more play. Nonetheless, if you try or have tried any of these decks in this video on either the ranked ladder or in tournament play, let me know which ones, as well as what your results were in the comments down below. With that, I'd like to thank y'all for watching, and above all else, stay pro.